Welcome to Skwat Talks, number 8. Tonight we're going to be talking about EDT, Escalating Density Training. It's a system of training put together by Charles Staley, pretty popular author for Testosterone magazine, T-Mag, online. In 2005 he wrote a book called Muscle Logic, and in it he described this system of training called Escalating Density Training. If you're familiar with the concept of volume in training, which is total tonnage moved in a given training session, and if you're familiar with the idea of intensity, which is the percentage of your 1 rep max within a given workout averaged out over the course of the workout or within a given set. If you're familiar with those concepts of volume and intensity, then you're probably also familiar with the term density. And density is a training metric which means the volume that you've moved within a given set or over a given workout divided by time, and that is your training density. So Charles Staley devised a method of training called escalating density training, which he describes in a book called Muscle Logic. He also describes it in a bunch of articles on T-Mag. It's certainly worth your time to look for those articles online. And then also, if you're really interested, you might check out his book called Muscle Logic. I have a copy of the book. I enjoyed it back in the day. I think I bought it when I saw it on the stands in like 2005 or 2006. And I thought it was a really ingenious way to kind of organize training. And I found it to be a pretty effective tool in your toolbox to use when you need a way to organize your training. So the idea behind escalating density training is that you set up your training in 15-minute PR zones. And a PR zone would be your personal record zone. So you would choose 2 exercises that you want to make progress on, and they would probably be antagonist exercises. So for example, you might do bicep curls with tricep extensions, and you would alternate as a superset between those 2 exercises for 15 minutes. And then you would count the number of reps that you got within those 15 minutes. You might also do, for example, what I'm doing here, which is you might alternate squats with pull-ups. Or you might alternate squats with, for example, military press. So you'd find some kind of distal antagonist or antagonist muscle groups, and you would choose 2 exercises that seem to work pretty well as some kind of superset. You would do those for 15 minutes and you would count your reps. And then the next time that you did that workout, whenever that is, maybe 2-3 days later, maybe a week later, you would count the reps and you would try to beat your previous PR. You would try to maximize your training density. You would try to get more reps within that 15 minutes. And over time, you hopefully would see an upward progression. You would see more and more reps, and if you managed to get 20% more than your original PR, then it would be time to add weight to the bar or make those exercises a little bit more difficult, or maybe switch up the exercise selection. So the goal is to increase reps over successive workouts, and the goal, of course, is to add weight and get stronger. Charles Staley does describe this as the original intent was a hypertrophy program, and I can see that it would work as really well as a hypertrophy program. I think it's a really good way to get some work in 15 minutes. So, you know, if you are someone who is pressed for time, it's a really, I think, time efficient way for you to organize your training. In addition to being time efficient, I think it's pretty easy to see progress or to see where you're maybe plateauing or getting stale. So in that regard, the idea of just simply counting reps with a certain amount of weight over a given amount of time, in this case 15 minutes, it makes it very clear whether or not you're making progress, or it also makes it very clear if you are tired or overworked. And over time, over successive workouts, you can very easily plot and see how you're doing. It's a nice circuit, so it does have some cardio benefit, I would say, depending on how heavy you're going, depending on how high your heart rate gets and how high you can maintain a heart rate throughout the course of the 15 minutes. There is probably some cardio benefit, and it's a great way to get in maybe some exercises that you find difficult to include in your training. If you know you only have 15 minutes that you have to include, for example, ab work or maybe calf work or some of those things that we tend to neglect, it's a lot easier pill to swallow when it's coming at you for just a 15-minute PR zone every once in a while. And I've found that in my own training, I found it a lot easier to include some of those exercises that I normally wouldn't necessarily include. So for example, for my training, I'll often do a 15-minute PR zone with, for example, 45-degree hyperextensions, and then I'll move to pull-ups, and then I'll move to push-ups, and then I'll repeat that cycle. So hyperextensions, pull-ups, push-ups, hyperextensions, pull-ups, push-ups for 15 minutes, and then I'll count those total reps. Now that's not something that I escalate, so it's not a workout that I'm expecting to see upward escalation as far as the number of reps with those body weight exercises, but I do try to hit, for example, around 280 to 300 reps in the course of that 15 minutes. How much am I getting with each of those things? Well, I'm getting probably, because I'm doing sets of 10 to 20 in the push-ups and in the hyperextensions, and then I'm doing sets of anywhere from 3 to 8 reps with my pull-ups, I get a lot of reps in that 15 minutes. But for me, those aren't exercises that I'm necessarily trying to see huge gains out of. I don't really care about how many reps I can crank out on my push-ups or on my hyperextensions. They're just a good exercise for me to maintain. So it is a nice way, I found, to use EDT is as a way to kind of get some of those exercises that I don't do on a regular basis in. There are some disadvantages, some limitations, maybe caveats that I would say go along with EDT training. Finding the right load initially can be difficult. If you, for example, if I were to start out with squats here using something that's too heavy for me, I might not be able to continue and finish out in good fashion the 15 minutes of work that I need. So you have to be careful and probably err on the side of light, at least at the beginning, when you are doing EDT PR zones. I would say also that finding the right pairings is at times a challenge. If you choose two exercises that maybe you didn't realize are kind of work together and maybe exhaust you too much, that could be a problem. If you, for example, did bicep curls and then you wanted to also do chin-ups, you might burn yourself out before the 15 minutes concludes. So finding the right pairings, finding the right exercises, I think that can be a bit of a challenge. So I would say start a little bit light and be smart in your exercise selection if you can. It might be too high rep for some pairings, so if you're someone who isn't good at record keeping, or if you don't videotape your work, you might lose count. So for example, when I do those PR zones, and I do those PR zones sometimes with 3 exercises, like I said, when I'm doing those hyperextensions, pull-ups, and push-ups, I'm keeping a physical note. I'm writing down my number of reps as I go so that I don't lose count. You have to make sure that you have a gym boss or some kind of interval timer to help you keep track of time as well. So if you're in a gym and you don't have ready access to that, I suppose most people probably use their phone for this, but I'm still kind of old school, so I use a Gym Boss, or I'll use that interval timer that I have here in my garage to keep track of how much time I have left. So keeping track of time and reps might be a challenge for some people. I would also say that it might not be the best workout plan for strength. If you are an intermediate or advanced trainee, then I think it's going to be difficult for you to load the exercise enough that you're going to be making strength gains. The problem with the 15-minute PR zone is that if you are someone who, for example, is squatting 600 or 700 pounds, I can't imagine that you're going to be able to get a lot of sets in with a weight that's a high enough intensity that it's going to impact your limit strength. I just don't see that. So for example, if you're a 600-pound squatter, and let's say you're working with, I don't know, 500 or high 400s with your work sets of squats, I just don't see you doing a lot of sets in that 15 minutes. I just think that if you are an advanced trainee and the weights are high, working at an intensity that's enough to impact your limit strength within that 15 minutes, just going to be very difficult. Most athletes, I think, who are very strong are going to need longer rest intervals, and you're just not going to be able to get much done in 15 minutes. So I think the time is just too compressed for advanced lifters. Lastly, and this is probably the biggest limitation with the idea of doing EDT, is use of equipment. If I'm in my garage, excuse me, if I'm in my garage, I have free access here. I don't have to worry about hogging resources. I don't have to worry about equipment. I can move back and forth. I can do whatever I want. If I'm in a commercial gym, and this is a problem with modern gyms in general, I would say, you can't really monopolize equipment in the same way. And that's an unfortunate thing with modern gyms today, is that people don't share equipment. And it's very difficult to do that if you're doing any kind of circuit training. Unless you and someone else are working together, it's very difficult to have access to more than one piece of equipment at any given moment. It used to be that in gyms sharing equipment was common, that people would very freely ask, hey, can I work in with you on that exercise? And people would be very generous about sharing equipment, sharing the squat racks. I would say that in the modern age, it's really a dying etiquette, that people just don't share equipment the way they used to. I think in our age of abundance now, people feel entitled to sit on a piece of equipment for 15 minutes to a half hour, and in between sets freely text and post to Instagram or whatever they want to do. It used to be that people just didn't hog equipment in that way. Now it's very difficult to share equipment. So I could not do this exercise combination probably in a commercial gym unless it was a squat rack with a pull-up bar on the outside of it. It would be very difficult to do that. At a home gym, it's much easier to implement something like this. All right, so I think that's all I have to say on EDT. If you have any questions or comments, or if you want to relate your own experience with EDT, please do that in the comments, and like and share. Until next time, I'll see you on the next Skwat Talks.